All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to World War II Submarine History with Haiku. And our topic for today is the recently released book, Tribals, Battles, and Darings by Dr. Alexander Clarke. I always want to say Arthur Clarke, uh, but it is.
Then you'd be talking to one of my great uncles or one of my great grandfathers.
Outstanding. But in fact, we are talking to Dr. Alexander Clarke. His book is published in the UK by Seaforth Publishing and here in the USA by the Naval Institute Press. So, yeah, a little different today. We're going to take a look at the war from a perspective other than periscope depth. So, Dr. Clarke, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Although, in terms of periscope depth, there was quite a lot of a running competition between some of the tribals and seeing if they could become periscope depth.
Well, I know you're going to tell us about that, but before you tell us about that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself personally and professionally?
My name's Alex Clarke. Thank you for having me on here. I'm a naval historian by inclination and profession. I was fortunate enough to do my PhD under Professor Andrew Lambert. My PhD was entitled What Valued a Dark Blue Sky and considered the role of technology, operational doctrine, strategy, and society in the development of naval aviation in the 1920s and 30s. It was a
So,
fun one. And then from that, I've ended up writing a book on destroyers.
so how
It
did you
can all
get
be back
how,
used.
how did you get to this point in your life? Did you like growing up? Did you know that you wanted to be a historian and that you were interested in world history and the war, or did you stumble into it?
Up, I wanted to be a fighter pilot in Star Wars. No. More seriously, I wanted to be a naval pilot and a naval aviator. But about the time I reached adulthood, I had some issues at home. I had unfortunately, my mum and dad divorced. My sister wasn't particularly well at the time, and my mum wasn't particularly well at the time. And so instead of going off the Navy, I thought, well, I'll go do a degree. And as I did my degree, my long term plan by that point had been go serve in the Navy, then do a PhD, and basically retire as a historian.
Yeah.
Basically, the model Andy Boyd has pursued. If you know Andy Boyd, he's a wonderful historian. And instead, what I ended up doing my bachelor's, then my master's. My master's was in international conflict. My bachelor's, the primary dissertation for my bachelor's was the future of was amphibious warfare. My master's was all about the future of amphibious warfare for medium powers. I was basically on a course to sort of join a navy and become an amphibious warfare specialist. It was sort of what I had mentally in my
Yeah.
mind, and I kept having talking with a few people, and well, the family wasn't getting any better, so I decided right then, well, I'll take advantage of the time. I'll go do my PhD, and I won't be too old once I've done my PhD.
Right.
I was thinking I would be because I did straight my bachelor's, then my master's, and then my PhD. So my theory was right then. So 21 finish my bachelor's, 22 finish my master's, and if I get through it, I'll be 25. So that's not that old.
No, not at all. I mean, I think
That seemed to me like a sensible thing to do to so because then I was still at home and I was able to be productive. But the thing is, you can put a PhD and working around a PhD around your family far easier if
okay.
they need.
So I'm just thinking what the process is like here in the United States. Here in the United States, you graduate from high school, you're 18, and then you go to a 4-year college to earn a bachelor's degree.
UK, it's
And
3 years.
okay, and here in the States, after you have the bachelor's, then you're looking at another 1 to 2 years to complete a master's, and then after that, another, it could be 1, 2, 3, or more years to do a PhD.
Pretty
So
much.
yeah, so here in the States, if you're 18, 21, 23, yeah, you're probably 25, 27 here in the States when you bust
Yeah.
out with that PhD.
And so this was my thinking. I could do that, and I could do all the other things I needed to do.
Well,
And the trouble was, it's sort of a case of then you have the 2010 Defence Review,
mhm,
and they stop flying aircraft. They have all sorts of things going on, and I get involved, start making a case about that, and I help out with a group called the Phoenix Think Tank and a few other organisations, and I help a lot of Falklands War veterans who I'd made contact with when I'd first done my bachelor's as part of my dissertation, because my dissertation had been on the Falklands War, and because I was really interested in living history, I went and interviewed a lot of the survivors and a lot of the people who fought. Michael Clapp, Julian Thompson, Jeremy
yeah,
Larkin, all those people I went and interviewed. I went and Philip Jones, who was who was the Commodore Amphibious Warfare at the time, but would go on to become the first Sea Lord. I went and interviewed them all. And the more and more I got involved in it, the more and more I got involved with looking at these issues and trying to make the case for the best review possible. And I quickly realized that, and this sounds so egotistical to say, it always does to me when I say it, my skill set, whilst I could have gone and done the training and probably been an okay naval officer,
yeah.
maybe a good one, but probably an okay, I'm going to say at least an okay one. I didn't think I'd be a bad one. But I was very good at the writing side, and despite dyslexia and all these things, I was very good at putting this stuff all together and making the case. And I did more and more work in that. And I was working my PhD, and I was looking through my PhD, and the more time I spent working PhD, the more I realized that one of the big problems we have in the modern world is you had more of a advantage of in the 1920s and 30s and even prior to World War One. Is you don't have those people who act as translators anymore between the armed forces and the government.
Okay.
Because the trouble is, it's either considered to know anything about the armed forces, it's often projected as you have to have served, and only those people understand it. But the trouble is, once you've spent 40 years in the armed forces and you've got to a general or admiral's rank, or even 20 to 30 years, you are so used to speaking to that group, you're not very good at speaking outside it.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah,
I
and
would
the
al-
tr- the
I would
the tr-
also I would also say that I don't. It's not a prerequisite. It's not a prerequisite in order to be a historian that you have military service
no,
because
not to be
because
a historian.
yeah, because I mean you or I we can look up the facts, we can look up the datas and the numbers, we can look at a radio spectrum chart and say, oh yeah,
Mm,
okay, they at this point in the war they were in the X band range with radar. Um, actually, I think the advantage if you have prior service, the advantage I think might be maybe if you're writing fiction because you have the background, you could actually manufacture those conversations between people. But that's it.
mm. I would agree. And the thing I found was that also, if you think about it, when we're talking about those periods, a lot of members of the politicians had served. And this had carried on after World War II. If you think of that, a lot of the politicians had served in World War II. So they had a service understanding. So communicators were working. But now, more than ever, we're in a period where there hasn't been a major war for a long time. There isn't a large service body. And the vast majority of politicians haven't served. And that's nothing wrong. That shouldn't be a prior requirement for politicians. We're not living in the real Starship Trooper universe where everyone has to have done service to actually be
Mhm.
a politician. If you go and read the books,
I've read it.
please.
Yeah,
The videos are the movies are slightly different to the books. They're both fun, but in completely different ways.
yeah.
The point is, in the 1920s and in the 1910s and 1920s, you had people who were mostly historians who understood enough about the Navy to be able to explain the Navy to the politicians, and enough about politics and the civilian world to explain that to the Navy. Someone who could understand enough about both worlds to be able to act as a translator in between. And
Right.
if you think about it, how many people fit that role to this day at the
Uh,
current time?
yeah, not many.
In fact, when you start looking at them, you start getting a list of some very old people.
Yes.
You're mostly talking Norman Freeman and Norman Palmer and those sort of people who are either sadly not with us anymore or who are pretty darn old. There aren't really many of the next generation down.
Right. Yeah. I've noticed
Um,
that on the German Navy side, the guys who've done a lot of the writing, they're either gone or they're people like in their late 70s, early 80s.
and I sort of started to think that maybe some of the trouble we have in the modern day and the modern stuff with defense procurement, etc., is not the necessarily the defense industrial complex, which people like to always make points about, or not
Right.
necessarily politicians being willfully ignorant, but it's literally that the two groups are talking in a way that they can't understand each other.
Yeah.
And you add in industry as a third group who don't understand the politicians and don't understand the military. Because they don't. Because if you ever sat in a room where you've got all three groups in a room, or in a meeting where you're literally between three people, one from each group, they'll all have a conversation. They'll all think they're explaining themselves brilliantly, and they'll go away thinking they've had a wonderful conversation. You'll sit there and they'll go, not one of you was having the same conversation as the other two.
Yeah. Isn't that something? But you're right.
And that's where I decided my skill set could fit in. Because I could sit there and go, no, what you don't understand is what they mean is this, which in your language is this, and in your language is that.
Yeah.
And start to try and build it. That's where I see to use the phrase Julian Corbett used, and Andrew Lambert tends to sort of coin occasionally. Historians of the present. So people who use their historical knowledge to try and give a basis, a common framework for the people in the present to have a conversation about strategic issues.
Right. So, kind of going from that. So what made you want to write a book? Was it a foregone conclusion that because you're in academia and a lecturer that you were going to have to write books in order to justify your pay, or was this something that you just felt passionate and you wanted to do?
I mean, I'm a contract lecturer, so really to justify my pay, I have to turn up and teach the courses.
Okay.
But if I want to go further and get a tenure post, I do have to be published.
Okay.
I prefer writing books to journal articles. Me and journal articles are never going to be friends. I write them. I'm glad enough to say I published one, and I think I've got a couple more coming out. And the one that was published published with the Northern Mariner, who are a lovely Canadian-based journal. And I've got some more wandering around. But the point is, it's going to sound strange. I find journal writing, you're writing such a short article. And this is something that's strange because I teach my students to be concise. And I'm very good at it. But whenever it comes to a journal article and I'm actually doing it myself, I'm not so good at doing it. It's kind of like physician heal thyself.
Yeah.
Academic who teaches people to be concise for a living and how to write concisely. Then you tell them to write a 5,000 word article about their topic, and they're going, but I have about 15,000 words here. Which might explain why my average chapter length is about 9,000 words in my book. The average chapter length is roughly that.
Okay.
Then there was someone who said to me, "The chapters are rather long," and I was going, "Really? I didn't notice."
um, let's uh let's expand on that a little bit. Let me first start by saying that if I knew an engineer in academia and he emailed me one day and said, "Oh man, I just wrote this great book on, you know, hydraulics," I would not be running to the book. I would not be running to Amazon to buy that book, right? But this is the really great thing about historians is that the stuff that you write, I mean, people want to read that, and I have so your UK publisher gave me a copy of your book, and it was funny because it's a PDF, and it was like 176 individual PDFs. So So I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I'll just stitch these together. So then I went online, and there's lots of free PDF creating services, but they limit you to the number of pages, and they limit how many jobs you can run. So it took me about 2 hours going to like 7 different websites so I could piece each of the chapters together.
Thank you.
But it worked, and I'm glad I did it because this is a really delightful book. I did get it last week right before Christmas, so I'm only and with the holidays and everything going on, I'm only into the second chapter, but I really like the book, and I'm going to give you specific reasons why I love the book.
Thank you.
Um, the photography is first rate. Even I'm looking at these PDF. I'm looking at this PDF on a 9-inch Kindle, and the resolution of these photos and the shot angles and everything, because I do some photography myself.
Yeah.
um I really appreciate it. It really, the photos in this book really bring the book to life.
I'm
um
glad. I had a lot of help with that because we had a lot of expenses. It's very expensive to get book pictures together. It's very expensive to get publishing rights
I
and all this.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. um
And luckily, Drakenfell was very, very helpful and basically went, "Let's open up my archive." And I went, "You sure? Yeah, go have fun." Okay.
that's That's a great. That's great. But it's an example. I'm finding out on YouTube, between creators, there is kind of a support network.
Oh yeah.
Um, Another thing I like.
It's one of the nice things versus some of the other places I work. You working on YouTube is far friendlier. People
Right.
are far more supportive and helpful.
Well,
It's wonderful.
I found that in the Navy too.
It's almost refreshed my faith in humanity. Almost.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely during my time in the Navy, especially when you get to like battalion staff. I mean, like I said, I was a civil engineer corps officer. So
Yeah.
that's like Seabees. We're doing construction work.
Yeah.
So we're modeled very similar to like what an Army engineer battalion would be like. Okay. In fact, that's the really nice thing about being a civil engineer, is that you can kind of move between the branches of services because you're doing the same work. But I definitely found in the Navy there was this kind of like this feed on your young mentality when it came to promotions and stuff. And that's just kind of echo your comment about like the difference between like this network on YouTube and what you might find with your peers in
Mm.
academia. But the second thing I
Ah,
like about this book is, I think the tables are put together really nice. They're
thank
really
you.
they're really easy to read. Um, the font is good. I like the color. It makes it very easy to read the tables.
That one is all. That one is mostly the font and the color is down to the publishers.
Is it
I
okay?
will say that because they did well. No, they gave me options, and I basically said, "Well, you know what's best." But the content of the tables is down to me and
Yeah,
trying to lay them out. And so I sent them through what I'd envisaged. And then, of course, there's the fact that what you produce on Word cannot necessarily go straight into the book. So they don't have to make any changes to actually put into a format that can go into the book. So I was actually pleasantly surprised by how close it came out to what I'd originally put together. I think it actually came out slightly better. They kept apologizing for bits, and I like this better than what I could do on Microsoft Word, and they're going, well, yeah, but we've had to do this and that, and I'm sort of going, you're far too kind people. You're really, really nice and lovely people.
yeah.
Again, it's like the thing I'm going to sing the praises of the front cover and the cover. The artist who did it, Tony, is an absolutely wonderful artist. Anthony Cowland is his full name, and you can buy prints, not of I don't think of this cover, but of various other artwork he's done from his own website, and he is lovely. And I am so glad he sort of. I sent him a sort of thing of saying, "Well, I'd like these destroyers, and if you could possibly put in, if you don't mind, because I
Yeah.
realise you're the artist and you better, you know, there are. I lost 3 uncles of my great uncles died of Fleet Air Arm in World War Two. Would you mind putting in 3 seagulls to represent them?" And on the front cover, you can see right above HMS Tartar, 3 seagulls
That's awesome.
flying, and yeah.
I think that another thing that I like, I like your writing style.
Thank you.
It flows in a nice way. Uh, I don't feel like you're talking down to me. I feel like this is a book that, you know, if you're an armchair historian on the British Navy, or if you're someone that maybe you play World of Warships and you want to find out a little bit about Haida and Cossack, this is a book you can get, and this is a book that will benefit you. And the last compliment, I mean, I could give you others, but we need to
Yeah.
move on.
Well, I'm
Um,
very glad you like the writing style because I've been told I write like I write how I speak, and I go, well, that's the point. If you,
yeah,
I especially didn't want to be come across as talking down to anyone because that's not the point of this book. This book is supposed to give people an idea of where general purpose destroyers came from, why they came about, and what their role is, and what their role is to this day. The fact is, they're the backstops for everything. They're
right,
they can do a little bit of everything, and they have to be able to do it well. And the reason they often can do that little bit of everything well is because of the crew and the morale they maintain in the crew, as it is because of their own design.
right. Um, and it's interesting that you mentioned the crew, because this book isn't just like throwing facts and figures in your face. You do tell stories about these ships, and like I said, I'm not that far into the book, but I do like I like the story of the Ashanti, and it's I think the African Goodwill tour that it did.
Yeah, it
Uh,
went to visit the it went to visit the Asante tribe. It
yeah,
went to, and it's really quite an interesting story about the king, the assassin, had only recently been allowed back
yeah,
because he'd rebelled against the British, and he'd been allowed back. And they do this sort of thing. They do a full ceremony. There's all sorts of things treated on her, and she's blessed. And she's rather like a similar story to HMS New Zealand in the First World War.
right,
She gets this bell, she gets these symbols, and a shield and a bell, and she, as long as she has them on her, she's fine. And she's one of these destroyers. She goes through World War II. She takes part in very equivalent actions to all the other tribal class destroyers. And yet, compared to her sisters, Asante goes through and goes, yeah, nothing's touched me. Ain't touching me. And it's just a case of you are HMS New Zealand. And I don't know if the line made it into the book. I haven't gone and checked that in the final version because there's part of me which wants to hopes it's still in there, which was a sort of a little tongue-in-cheek recommendation that the Royal Navy should probably get, considering this experience of HMS Asante and HMS New Zealand, they should try and get tribal blessings for all future warships, as it's obviously a good protection measure.
yeah, absolutely. So
I'm
what
not
made
sure if that line made it into the book in the end because the publisher kept going, "You are going to wind people up with that line," and I'm going, "But no! Look at the fact. Look at what happened in this shit.
yeah,
It
um,
might upset the Church of England, but they can do the blessings if they want to.
right.
You know, they just need to be prepared to do some dancing, obviously, as part of it.
So what made you pick what made you pick the topic that you did?
Mainly because I'm one of those historians who, when he's looking through books and goes, "Why have you not talked about this?" These little destroyers, they keep showing up everywhere, but they're always just names. They're just a name. If they know anything, it's destroyers. A pair of destroyers did this, or the, and they're all talking about the cruiser and the battleship or the aircraft carrier, and it's
Right.
escorted by 6 destroyers. And I go, which 6 destroyers? Because the Royal Navy doesn't just go, and I know from working with the Royal Navy, the Royal Navy doesn't just go, you know what, which six destroyers do we have? Those six. Go on. They think about it. Like one of the interesting things, being into 10th flotilla and what they got up to in World War II. Stardust, the Royal Navy specifically chooses the name 10th Flotilla, which had been used by the Harwich Force in World War One. So they use a name which is traditionally associated with an elite destroyer flotilla, and then it's packed with every single tribal class destroyer they can get their hands on, whether it's Royal Navy, Royal Canadian Navy, every single one they can get their hands on. And you sit there and go, okay, what are you building this for? It's not just you going, we want a fleet, we want some destroyers in this formation, and you realise very quickly it's for night fighting. It's because their job is to clear the channel of any enemy attackers, of anyone trying to get torpedo boats or destroyers or anything through to the D-Day landings. You're not going to get through. And there is an exercise which is often discussed in World War II where some German motor torpedo boats actually get into the landing craft.
Yeah.
And there's a huge loss of life. No coincidence that it's not long after that they decide to form destroyer flotilla. And these destroyers have the instructions and the mandate that if wherever they go, everyone else gets out of their way. And that's you are giving a relatively junior officer, a destroyer flotilla captain, the authority to order battleships, merchant convoys, anything that's in their way, out of their way. Because the thing that's going to take priority over everything is this destroyer flotilla, whose job is to clear the channel.
Yeah, but you're right. But in history, they don't get a lot of love, do they?
Nope. They get forgotten.
Because I know what you're talking about. Like anytime I'm reading a book about, U.S. naval actions, it was this action, these were the task forces, and they'll list out all the battleships, CVs, cruisers, and then it'll just say 4th Destroyer Squadron. And that's it. It doesn't seem fair because they're doing like 90% of the work.
And they're often providing like 90% of the ships.
Yeah, right.
I think there was one I was talking about. I'm not sure I was talking about it recently. Yes, it was. It was when I was talking about the whole operation going on around Toronto and Operation Judgment, all the things which we got different operations going around. The amount of books you read, which just they had this many destroyers and this many destroyers. You go through it and go, you've got 30 odd destroyers involved in this. They're like 2/3 of all the ships in terms of numbers. They're doing some quite important thing. And again, then in that scenario, you go, right, so there's Task Force X, which is off going into, Cunningham sends this cruiser and destroyer task force off to go into the Adriatic and to wind up the Italians by really, really going into the area which they consider their home waters.
Right.
And the amount of books I really I've read which just list the cruisers and say, and 2 destroyers. Then you look at the 2 destroyers, and when you're looking at the facts in some books, and you go suddenly realize, hang on, that's Nubian and Mohawk. They're the only 2 tribal class destroyers he has. So his only 2 tribal class destroyers are the 2 destroyers he picks to go with this surface action force to go into there.
And according
they're not just any 2 destroyers, are they?
Yeah.
Because he's picked the only 2 of one type of destroyer he has.
Yeah, and according to your book, there's only 16 tribals that are ever made, correct?
Yes, for the Royal Navy. There are a fair number, a few more made for the Canadians and the Australians, but the Royal Navy only builds 16.
So what do you want people to get from your book?
That ships matter, of all sizes matter, and that you don't just construct a ship. Well, it's something which I'm going to be working on, especially in the book which I'm sort of starting to write now, which is the follow-on book.
Yeah.
And in the introduction, I've already got the line, and I'm going to quote this, so we'll see if it survives. We are wrong when we talk of ships and comparisons of war and peace are simple games of top trumps, where the best stat, whether high or low, will win. War is not that way, and navies know that. Navies don't build ships, they build fleets. When we compare a destroyer, or a battleship, or an aircraft carrier, and pronounce the designers of the old Navy got this wrong or that wrong, as opposed to another Navy which got it right, we are either starting from the fallacious assumption that the ships are being built for the exact same reasons, to satisfy the same doctrine and the strategy, and the same geostrategic constraints, or we're simply giving vent to hot air. And that's the point. When you're looking at the tribal class destroyers and you compare them to the other destroyer leaders, which the Italians are building, the French are building, the Americans and the Japanese are building, those ships are all heavy on the torpedoes. And that's fine because that fits their scenarios. But the Royal Navy goes, that's not what we need. We've got torpedoes. We might not say we have enough of them, but we have a lot of them. What we need are ships which can make sure the destroyer carrying the torpedo carrying destroyers can get within fighting range of the enemy and can see their targets. And we want things which can screen the surface force at night and do the surface fighting at night. And in peacetime, can take on some of the presence mission from our cruiser fleet. And that's what the tribals are for. They're
So,
general purpose assets that can fit a range of roles. And they
right.
don't fit. You wouldn't build the tribal class. If you were the US Navy, you wouldn't build the tribal class destroyers because they don't fit what you need from your destroyers. But that doesn't mean the US Navy is wrong, or the Royal Navy is wrong, or the US Navy is right, or the Royal Navy is right. It means they build what fits their need. And
Right.
that's the thing you have to stop. You have to look at books and look at ships, and that's what I want people to get us book and judge what does that navy need for its need. If we look at current times, if you look at the current conversation, the amount of times people go, "Oh, what this navy should be doing is building X," which another navy's building, and you go, "Well, would you really build X for your navy, or would you take the idea of X and adapt it into various things to make it suit your roles, and then what you'd end up with is not X but Y or Z.
Hmm.
It wouldn't be X."
Right.
If we can look at the current the Constellation class frigate. They are very much not the design which everyone keeps going, "Oh, they're this design." No, they're not. They've been USNicized to fit the USN's needs. They've taken a framework, but it's been USNicized, and it should be. Because if you built the model which everyone else has, or which the people originally have, it wouldn't fit the USN needs, and then it would be a waste of money.
Right. I know that you did because I've been through your channel, and I know you did a video on the process of writing the book. So I'm going to ask you. So and that's like I think that's like an hour long video that you did. So I understand that.
Far longer than it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be about 20 minutes quick video, and it turned into an hour long one.
Yeah, but I'm going to ask you I'm going to ask you the same question. What was it like writing the book?
It was fun. You get to think in long form. It's kind of something. Uh, the only previous exam I've had is in my PhD, when your limit was 100,000 words, and you can start off by thinking, "Oh, so many words. Oh, how am I ever going to do it?" But actually, what you start breaking up and thinking, "What can I cover?" Now, my PhD thesis, I loved writing it, but the entire chapters on the US Navy and the Japanese Navy get deleted because I couldn't fit them in the word count.
Huh. Okay.
Noticing a theme coming here? Um, that's why it ends up focusing entirely on the Royal Navy,
Got
because
it.
because in the end I couldn't do the Royal Navy and the US Navy and the Japanese Navy to the same level of depth and fit them in the 100,000 words.
Yeah.
It would have been literally. I worked it out at one point because I worked out from the stuff I'd amassed. It would have been 225,000 words.
Yeah.
I was happy to do it, but my professor told me no, the limitation was 100,000 words.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was my PhD thesis. The book, when it started out, I was considering adding in the county class destroyers as well that come after the Darings. And I decided not to because they're really into the missile. They're starting into the missile age,
Yeah.
and there is enough of a difference of motive and motivation that really they'd be a different book. And you start off and you think, right, and I have this word count, and you start working through it. Now you start thinking, what stories do I want to put in here? Because what I saw it was very much a case of I want to put in the stories, those little stories, and have them thread through, because they're going to be what people are going to remember and keep interested. There are going to be the facts and the figures and all the stuff necessary like that in there, provide people with the reference, because that is good for people to have the reference.
Did your publisher give you a word limit for this book?
They gave me a word guideline.
Okay.
We
Okay.
blew it through it. A few thousand words over, not much. No, it didn't go full 10,000 words over. Um, the publisher was very happy, actually. When they came back to me, they said, we were honestly were expecting you to be much more over than you are. I went, well, I could have been. Do you want it? No. We're happy with what we have. We're happy. And it was a case of taking that and taking some articles I'd written on tribals at certain points and gone, right, and what bits in those articles would I like to have written better? Because again, most people who write short articles will think of, well, what would I have done if I'd been writing that article with double the word count or treble the word count? And that was the thing. Some of the stories you can tell in far more rich detail. You can give far more nuance. You can talk about baked beans being cans being fired from guns because they run out of shells,
Right.
which probably was a two-layered insult to the Italians, because those baked beans coming at them, and if they saw the tomato sauce on anything, it's probably a case of, that is not proper tomato sauce. That is offensive. Judging by many of my Italian friends whenever I've served them baked beans. Oh, that's me being evil, but it's just a fun thing to do. It's
Yeah.
also it is stressful, and I would always tell people try and get into an exercise routine. Otherwise, you will find yourself just eating lots of chocolate and working away, not sleeping much. And trouble is, eating chocolate and not sleeping is not a good thing for your body.
Well, I tell you what, listening to your video on the writing process, I got to be honest, my takeaway was that it was a very traumatic and cathartic process. And I mean that in a nice way, I guess.
Uh, let's put it this way: the transition was very, because of course I was finishing off when COVID, so I had my writing style all set up, and this writing style, which is 7 years of how I get the writing done, and suddenly I was at home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And instead of me doing my usual thing of whenever I go off to teach in different unis or teach for teach different places, being holed up in a hotel room
Hmm.
where all you do is basically use the hotel gym if they have one, and then, well, wandering around the city on your own is kind of boring. I usually do a little bit of a walk just to get my bearing and see if there's anything interesting, but that's about it. Or sit down and write, which is lovely because you get your writing done in peace and you don't feel like you're upsetting anyone or you're ignoring any of your family or you're not being part of your local community and helping out where you should be.
Hmm.
But the trouble is then going to writing at home and you sort of go, sort of, okay, yeah, and you hear the dog bark and needs to be let out. Okay, fine, go let out the dog. But I'm
Yeah,
dyslexic, and the one area where it does show up, which is really annoying, is how long it takes me to get back into things. So once I'm disturbed, it takes me about half an hour, 45 minutes to get back into the flow again.
because there are a lot of distractions at home, which is what I've been working remote. It's going on 2 years, and at first I thought, oh man, this is going to be awesome. And I know I can get my work done fast. I'm going to have all this time. I can, I can throw myself into this my own YouTube project. But what you find, what you find out is I still got to do my job. The kitchen still needs to be cleaned. Somebody's got to get groceries. Somebody's got to prep dinner. I got cats on and off the furniture, the desk. It's actually really hard to block time out.
Yes, it is.
Really?
It's become slightly easier, and this is why, to an extent, the second book was a bit delayed. Has been a bit delayed in sort of starting. It's sort of a case of I wanted to wait till I'd seen how the tribal battles and airings was perceived to an extent before I started the second one, because I wanted to check whether I got the tone right.
Yeah.
and I seem to have got the tone right from the feedback I received so far. So I'm now throwing myself into starting writing rather than just researching what is my next project. And I've also now got an office in the garden, which anyone who's watched my channel will know I pretty much built myself because our builders disappeared off halfway through the job. I was told I wanted to build it myself from the get-go because it's a very nice. Basically, the company is a Dutch log company, kind of like you get from America tends to seem to import them from Canada, but we tend to get ours from the Netherlands in the UK, called Lugard, who are lovely. And so they send you all these pre-cut pieces of wood, which is basically a giant Lego kit, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And I quite like woodwork. I was taught it by my grandfather, my father. I built the shelving behind me, which is piled high with books, and needs to be finished off with even more shelves, so the books don't get piled quite so high. And so I would have been quite comfortable building it all, but no, my mom and sister felt that we should get in proper builders. And so we got in proper builders who left the job halfway through, and I ended up finishing it off. And now working in here, I am just far enough away that I only get called if there's an actual problem.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't hear it.
Yeah. Here in the States,
And
we would call them man caves. You know, you take over your basement and just.
I could call it that, but my sister has the office right next door to me.
Oh, okay.
So it's we're in a sort of one building, which is split into two.
Okay.
So that's what I did, and she's gonna. So I can't really call mine a man cave unless she calls hers a girl cave, and she refuses to do that because apparently that's something weird. And I just went, I'm not getting involved in that conversation.
Yeah. So if you had to write this book again, what would you do differently?
Hopefully not COVID happen. If I
Yeah.
was going to write this one again, I would probably. The one area, and I've been quite honest about this, I would have liked to have done a lot. I would have liked to have got more of the personal side of research done, is on the daring class, because whilst I did have enough stories, and this is part of me, I would have liked more stories, if that makes sense. Because
Yeah, absolutely.
I felt like they were the ones which I had literally 3 weeks scheduled of going into the National Archives 2 days each of those 3 weeks, and then COVID hit and shut everything down. And that was 6 days I was planning to use to get more of the context stories that I could to add in slightly more drama. It would have probably made me go over the word count by tens of thousands of words,
Yeah.
but it's what I was planning on doing. But we all didn't know it was coming. We thought we had time, and you couldn't really change the schedules around in terms of dates because you had to go into work. And then suddenly you went from having to go into work and booking appointments to the archives and those things to everyone's at home. And you didn't really have the chance to go, I'd like to take a week off work and spend that week in the archives to prep because I think this is going to happen.
Yeah. I ran into this problem here in the States. When it took me about 6 months to a year to plan what I wanted to do with my channel. And the first project I wanted to tackle was there was a German destroyer, the Z-39, that was actually awarded to the United States. It was a war prize, and it ends up becoming the DD-939 in the U.S. Navy, and the Navy holds on to it for a number of years, mostly as a test platform. But one of the Americans who skippered that boat, I discovered had a really fascinating World War II and post-war naval career. And really what I wanted to do is I wanted to get the watch officer logs and stuff for the DD-939 and read through and see what did they actually do? What did the Americans actually do with this boat? Well, those records are with all the naval records at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. And I had planned on, like you're talking, I had planned on going out there for like 3 days and just going through, because that was stuff that wasn't digitized yet. I mean, if you want to find like logs and stuff for like the USS Enterprise in World War II, like that stuff's all probably been digitized. It's readily accessible. But this more obscure stuff, it's still in boxes in a warehouse.
Yeah.
And so I had planned to go out.
That's the case for most destroyers. This is the thing.
Yeah,
That's the thing. People
yeah,
go, "Oh, it's in this archive. Oh, they've done such good digitalizing. Destroyer stuff. Oh, that's just still in the basement." Okay.
yeah. And then I called the National Archives and I was like, hey, I want to come out. I want to spend a couple days looking at these records. And they're like, no, sorry, COVID. And
Mhm.
you just have this door slammed in your face. So I had to spend some time kind of rethinking. Okay, I'm not going to be able to do this. So what else I can do? Um,
If I remember correctly, Z39 was a 1936A mob group, wasn't she?
I think it was.
Yeah.
I do not, unlike a lot of historians, I
The
do
reason
not.
I remember is they're called the Narvik destroyers, which are often portrayed as being built as a result of the Narvik experience, but most of them were actually ordered before Narvik happened. And that's what meant
Yeah,
that the Germans to produce these destroyers, which are supposedly built with Narvik experience, and yet still, when they found themselves facing against tribal class destroyers, a long time after Narvik, they still find themselves going, "We'd rather be anywhere but here right now."
yeah.
Because that was the point. The Royal Navy built the difference in the big difference in the Germans are also to an extent building destroyers to fill the light cruiser role, but they do that by trying to put a light cruiser style gun on a destroyer, which has a slower rate of fire, and they can only put a few of them.
Yeah. Oh shit. I think we're still recording.
I think we're still recording. I'm not sure what happened there. And the Royal Navy works by going, well, what we'd like to do, and what we'll do, is we'll put destroyer guns, but as many destroyer guns as we can on there. Because the odds are destroyers are going to end up engaging at destroyer gun ranges, whether they are big destroyers or small destroyers. In which case, if they can, as they in either ship is going to be, any destroyer is going to be carrying that much armor, it'll probably go to the fight will probably go to the ship which can have the most volume of fire.
Yeah, and this is a great segue into the next question, which is how do the DDs that you write about, how do they compare to U.S. and German DDs at that time? Because when I start reading about the tribals, I see that its displacement is 2,000 tons, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, this is like a Fletcher.
It is, but I would argue a Fletcher class, and they are. I love the Fletcher class. But if I go back to from my earlier point, the Fletcher class are in many ways are built around their torpedoes. They're built around the torpedo attack. And that's good because that's what the US Navy needs them for. But
Okay.
the Royal Navy, the tribals, they are built around their guns. And that's the difference. The Fletchers carry 5 single mounts
Right.
and 2 sets of torpedoes, two loads of torpedoes, 2 launchers. Whereas the tribals carry a single launcher, torpedo launcher with roughly 5 torpedoes on it,
Okay.
and but they carry 4 double guns, so they carry 8 guns. And you see, that's a sort of okay. So I would point out, though, that the thing is, the Royal Navy was very impressed with the American design of the engine and the compartmentalization of their system in their hull structure.
Yeah.
But the tribals are built using the traditional Royal Navy style. The battles are still, to an extent, built using it, and then the darings come in, and they use the full American sort of style of layout of this engines.
Okay.
And you start to go, well, how come the British had their style and the Americans? When you think that would be sort of one thing which is similar, and you realise that the British dissimilarity comes from some of the testing where they felt it was easier to balance the ship,
Hmm.
and it was also the style turbines the British were using. And post-war, when they're using the turbines they're getting for the darings, they can really adopt the American style, and they're quite pleased with it. So
So then,
this is one of those things. I would argue sort of the Fletcher, the layout is of the engines is a really good design, and they are really much designed around carrying a lot of torpedoes, carrying enough guns, but basically they are a large torpedo destroyer. Their job is to fight the traditional destroyer battle of the time. They are probably the best of the traditional destroyers you have available in World War II.
yeah.
And then the tribals are sort of built to this role of going, right, we need something to do the cruiser role. And so we'll cut down on the we'll cut down on the number of torpedoes and increase the number of guns.
Yeah.
And the Germans go, we need something to do the cruiser role, but we also wanted to destroy role. So we're going to take the same amount of torpedoes, but we're going to have fewer guns because they're all going to be these really big ones. And then they get into close border fights with Royal Navy destroyers, and it's a case of, yes, we can fire about we can fire about one salvo to almost every 3 of yours, and your salvos contain 8 shells and ours contain 3. Okay, there's a problem going on here. At Narvik, for example, the Germans are literally driven back by sheer weight of fire of the oncoming tribal class destroyers.
Yeah.
There are other Royal Navy destroyers there providing some extra fire, but you've got 3-4 tribal destroyers at times abreast, basically just chucking. Well, each salvo coming from 4 of them is 4 times 16 shells coming down range straight at you.
I'm familiar with the Narvik campaign more from a submarine standpoint, but I know that the German DDs, they put up a pretty good fight, but it did get to the point where, right, that they just had to bring the tribals in and just say, okay, this is enough. We just got to put these guys down now.
Basically, what happened was the first fight was between the Norwegian defenders and the German destroyers, and that was very lucky for the Germans in that of what the Norwegian defenders they found. The second fight was when the H-class flotilla turned up, and that annoyed quite a lot of the tribal crews because the tribals were supposed to be the reconnaissance destroyers and were supposed to do that duty. But by that point, the British, several of the Royal Navy admirals were being quite careful. They wanted to be careful their tribals because they realised how valuable they were.
Mm-hmm.
So they were off doing some other duties, whilst these H-class flotilla, which were a slightly older flotilla of regular destroyers, went in. They did quite well, but they got mauled, and the Germans got mauled. And then you have the third Battle of Narvik, which is where the Royal Navy turns up with the remaining H-class destroyers, a few other destroyers which can get some SMIs, and the tribals. And the tribals are on the front row, and basically then there's HMS Warspite sitting in the middle with her 15-inch guns, going, if you manage to get past them, you won't get past me. And then the other destroyers following up behind and supporting the tribals. And there are scenarios like HMS Eskimo, where she's, this is towards the end of the fight, she goes round a bend. They know the Germans are going to be waiting the other side. The spotter has spotted the Germans are waiting the other side.
Right.
Warspite can't hit them with her guns, so they're going around this bend in the fjord, and they know the Germans are waiting. So she speeds up to full speed. She charges round. She's firing her guns. She gets hit by a German torpedo, which takes out her bow, which takes out a mount. Because these aren't turrets, these are mounts with shields, because the Royal Navy had worked out for their guns, for the tonnage, they could either give you a shield, which is basically worse than paper mache, a turret which is worse than paper mache, or they could give you a shield, which is actually quite decent.
Okay.
And they thought the shield was better. Because if you were in closed space and the explosion was going to come in to you anyway, you were just going to get definitely killed. Whereas if you were behind a shield and it managed to punch through that, it might carry on into the water. Or alternatively, you can duck out from a shield quite easily and get a distance. Survive. So A shield, A mount, is destroyed with the explosion. It takes out the bow. B continues firing. And Eskimo just carries on turning until she's stern towards the Germans. Again, she's got the same pair of guns amounts afterwards as she has forward, so that she's a completely balanced, design like a cruiser, and starts advancing towards them stern first, still pushing back the Germans as the other British destroyers come round. So the Germans can't fire at the other British destroyers because they've got to deal with this absolute maniac coming at them stern first, firing away as if it hasn't just lost its bow, hasn't even blinked, hasn't even stopped for a moment to pause and worry about things or notice that the fact it could be flooding or leaking from the front, doesn't care, because its job, and the entire crew understands this on the ship, is to provide cover for those other destroyers to get in, and they will do whatever is necessary because that's their mission.
It's crazy. It's like Gary Cooper. It's like high noon,
Mm.
Like you
You
got the
know,
first.
you've got it's like in a sort of some western. A guy gets his leg blown off or something, and still carries on fighting because as long as he carries on fighting, his friends can get round them, and win the battle. And
Yeah,
Eskimo survives. She goes and gets a new bow fitted. She'll lose another two in World War Two.
right. I,
It's
I, I
it,
think that, man,
yeah. If any ship deserved to be memorialized just for losing bows, it's HMS Eskimo.
yeah, yeah,
She sort of considers them a detachable appendage.
yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking if you made a movie about that campaign, I'm seeing like this Sergio Leone spaghetti western ending with this tribal just going into
Yeah,
the face of death, you know,
there
with
are three
Chris.
German destroyers waiting the other side of that S bend. There is no chance of survival. The ships can only go through in single file. If she doesn't go through and doesn't drive them off, the other ships won't get through. She does it. She does her job.
Yeah,
And the thing is, they never hesitate. They don't consider. You know, the gun crews aren't demurring. There's none of us. You read the stuff afterwards. You read the accounts of it. They're not. They understand their job. They're not gleeful about it. They're not. Oh yeah, we're gonna get the Bosch or anything like that. No, it's a very serious thing. It's their job. They expect themselves because the tribals pre World War Two had actually been started out being called tribal flotillas rather than destroyer flotillas. And eventually they are changed into destroyer flotillas. But from that moment on, they have this sort of idea that, well, destroyer crews consider themselves an elite, but the tribals consider themselves the elite of the elite.
right,
If you're talking about the modern sort of scenario, if you consider it to Americans, SEAL teams versus SEAL Team Six.
right.
One has the reputation of being the rest. You're none of you are considered bad. You're all considered elite, but one is considered holy guacamole. That's coming towards me.
So
And
something that
it's
I,
the same with the tribals. It's a case
yeah,
of it's they've built that into themselves. Even when newer other destroyers come out, they still consider themselves the elite within elite, and they hold themselves to that standard. You won't get past us. You know,
yeah,
during Crete, Nubian chucks herself in the way of an air attack to stop the bombers getting to Formidable.
right,
When you're talking about in Norway, it's other campaign, HMS Gurkha charges an air attack to drive off so the troop convoys will get through. She gets sunk, unsurprisingly. But she does draw away 60 bomber aircraft, which could have attacked unarmed merchant ships,
right,
which were trying to get the troops out,
right.
and just charges straight in them. If you know, if we consider the reputation of Gurkhas and their battlefield
It's,
reputation,
mhm.
charging straight at an enemy air attack, no qualms, no fear, just going straight for them, that seems pretty Gurkhaish.
Absolutely. Um, so something I had been thinking about from your book, from having this conversation with you, these tribals just seemed like they were such fantastic ships. Why were only 16 made? Because the US made like 175 Fletchers?
Well, you see, you start off, you have a debate going on in the Royal Navy of whether it's worthwhile building the larger destroyers versus the small destroyers, and whether you need the torpedoes. And then, of course, you have the treaty system and it's slowly breaking down. And so they're trying to churn out large destroyers, and then they're trying to churn out escorts. And eventually they go, right, and we do need to build more, but we're going to build a new design because we've got a 4.5-inch gun coming through. And
Mhm.
that comes to battle class. So that's why this book is three class of ships, because basically the tribals are the ones built pre war.
Right,
And then they have a debate over what kind of L class to build. They have a design called L70, which would basically be a tribal class destroyer, but with the extra bank of torpedoes added in. So imagine a Fletcher's load of torpedoes with the full guns of a tribal class, and imagine what that would have been like to try and fight. If you're, having enough trouble fighting a tribal, imagine a tribal with extra torpedoes.
right.
It just wouldn't have been nice. But
And those
but
and those
they're trying to build these things, and eventually they build the battle class.
yeah,
And
and when does the battle class when do they start rolling off and entering service?
Well, that's the thing. They get really delayed by radars and wanting to put them fit them the latest, greatest, best sensors, which means they don't actually start entering service till about 1944,
Okay.
and then they enter service really slowly because they've decided to go with American-based radars because they can build them more quickly
Okay.
and all sorts of systems. And honestly, the other thing that delays them is the 4.5-inch gun. Because first of all, they're supposed to be designed around the 4.5-inch non-deck penetrating non-deck penetrating gun,
Yeah.
the upper deck mount or UD mount, and that would have been a great system, but it just wasn't in service. And eventually, they have to be designed around being fitted with the 4.5-inch gun and turret, which is the same as were pretty much fitting to aircraft carriers and battleships.
Yeah.
So when you're designing your destroyer around it, you have to redesign your destroyer, and that takes time. And it takes time to get basically, that's the trouble for the battles.
Okay.
But even while they're doing that, yes, the Royal Navy only builds 16, but to make it, because the government are the ones demurring about the funding and the debate, they get the Royal Australian Navy and the Royal Canadian Navy to build more. So they end up building 27, but the remaining ones are built by the Royal Canadians and the Royal Australian Navies.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So that's their way of getting around that.
Right.
And then, of course, the Royal Navy's building the battle class, and then post World War II, they go back and go, you know what? We really like this idea. It worked really well. We're going to build the Daring class, and the Daring class are the last of the gun-based destroyers, and they are gorgeous, gorgeous ships.
Qualifier here, World of Warships is not a naval simulation. But having said that, I do enjoy playing the Daring in World of Warships. It's a really sexy looking boat. The camos that they have for it are really, really nice, and it's a really powerful destroyer. I mean, I'm seeing the vision. I'm seeing the vision of what you're talking about. High rate of fire, smaller caliber guns in
Yeah,
an extremely maneuverable platform, and the problem that presents to your enemy. Because for me,
now imagine an entire flotilla of 8 of those charging at you.
yeah, I know. So like for me, I'm here in the United States. I'm an American citizen, but I'm first generation. My parents came over from Germany after the war.
Mm,
So largely here in the United States, I grew up in a German bubble. So and that manifests itself in certain ways. Like I drive German cars, I've got German cutlery in the kitchen, and like in studying naval history and in playing games, I tend to gravitate towards German themed stuff, right? And it's something that's always bugged me about like the German destroyers, the 1934s and the 1936s. They just seem to be getting their butts kicked all the time. I mean, I know they had some successes, I think individually or in small groups, but they're just never able to maintain the kind of presence that the British DDs do.
I think the problem for the Germans is that, again, they don't have light cruisers. And so the desire is to try and make the destroyers fill up the role.
Yeah,
And the thing is, they go for a very Germanic approach, I would argue, in that they go for the perfect solution. And
right.
the perfect solution is that bigger gun, because that's on paper the perfect solution for filling the cruiser role, because you make a gun which can scare the cruisers. And the
Right.
Royal Navy goes, well, no, you have the torpedoes to scare cruisers and battleships. That's what you do. The torpedoes are for that job.
Hmm.
That's what you carry them for. No, no. What you need if you're going to do the cruiser role from a destroyer's perspective is you need more guns, as
Yeah.
many as you can fit on. The tribal class destroyers and the battles especially. You could argue the Royal Navy become very, very. This is going to sound rude to some audience, but please bear with me. American, in that there's an American perception in the world that the Americans always want as many guns as they can fit onto anything. Whenever you see them, and they look like the moment you see a ship, and if you see a ship which is a photo of a ship which is crammed with guns, you think immediately that's American, because that is the reputation the U.S. Navy has. And if you read some of the reports from USS Enterprise during her Pacific operations and her gunnery officers' reports, you might get a strong idea of where that came from. Um, I seem to remember him complaining that that she doesn't have enough more top weight mass so that she can take even more cannon being fitted to her. And the thing is, That's the Royal Navy approach to the tribals. They carry, for their time, and this is not going to, as World War II goes on, it doesn't look it, but for their time, they look at when they're launched in 1938, 39, they carry an incredibly heavy AA fit for what they're supposed to do. It doesn't work out quite that way, and they end up getting the X mount of 4.7 inches replaced with 4-inch high angle weapons, which also turn out to have a tremendous advantage in destroying torpedo boats because they're slightly faster firing, and they can also be, unlike the 4.7s, which tend to punch through the torpedo boat and come out the other side. The 4-inch ones tend to go boom inside the torpedo boat, which
Right,
the
right.
the German Schnellboats do not enjoy. But the thing is, the Royal Navy go, we can use these destroyer guns for this. And that's what happens to the Germans because they, yes, have the better gun. And if they score a hit, they can do tremendous damage. But if you consider the range finding and firing control systems that you have available for destroyers versus battleships, rate of fire starts to really have an impact on your accuracy. And the fact is, if you've got 8 guns all firing or 3 guns all firing, those 3 guns might be heavier and might, if they land an impact, have a bigger impact. But the thing is, you haven't got any armor to resist those lighter guns, and they're firing 8 shells at twice the rate that you are firing 3 shells. So they're going to have 16 shells in the air coming your way, versus your 3. So you've got let's say you get a hit for each from each salvo. Well, let's say you've got a 1 in 3 chance of getting a hit. Well, you're going to get 1 hit. Well, they've got 16 coming towards you, so that's going to be 5, 6 hits. Well,
Right.
that's going to cause a lot more damage than 1 hit.
Yeah, actually at the start of COVID, I actually did a little naval miniature wargaming of Battle of the River Plate, and
Yeah,
my takeaway from that was that yeah, Grash Bay, I mean, it had the range, but once Norfolk, if I remember correctly, once it gets into range, its rate of fire is just tremendous.
yeah.
And the thing that you're talking about, it's as the war goes on, that becomes so much more important as electronics become so critical to ships. Now it's really not necessary anymore to deliver a fatal shot to a magazine. All you need to do is if you can pepper the superstructure enough with high explosive and damage the electronics, you can take that opponent out of the fight.
Well, let's be honest. The real killing blow to Scharnhorst is Belfast knocking out her radar,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that's a 6-inch light cruiser.
right.
Admittedly, it's a town class. It's a town class light cruiser, which is, as I've tried to explain to to many people, it's the Royal Navy's honestly not a surface raider gov light cruiser.
Hmm.
In that they've got long range, they're armed with a lot of 6-inch guns, and basically their purpose is to hunt down surface raiders. But you sort of go, well, hang on, how are you going to hunt down surface raiders? Well, we're going to carry a lot of aircraft, so we can do reconnaissance for our fleet as well. And we're quite fast, quite long range, and maneuverable. Aren't those the same attributes you need for a surface raider? Oh, it's just incidental, isn't it? And it's a case of, okay, so in the Pacific War doctrine, that's your surface raider to block up Japanese supply lines. If for
Yeah.
some reason the Americans don't actually decide to join the British in fighting a war against the Japanese, and that's in the 1930s idea pre World War II. But it's the same reason as the U.S. Navy, the IJN are looking at building 8-inch cruisers. The Royal Navy is still concentrating on the 6-inch cruisers, because the Royal Navy's looking at it going, on the treaty limits, you can't really protect an 8-inch cruiser that much against a 6-inch cruiser. And the odds are a rate of fire of a 6-inch gun versus an 8-inch gun, and effective at the likely engagement range. And this is the other thing the Royal Navy do a lot of work in during pre-World War II, which comes into a real impact on the destroyer war,
Yeah.
is likely engagement ranges. Because yes, there's your theoretical maximum engagement range of your 8-inch versus your 6-inch, which always favors your 8-inch. But what are you likely to actually engage at? Are
Well,
you
yeah,
likely to engage at maximum range?
right. I mean, we're talking about the North Atlantic, so considering the sea states and the weather patterns that you encounter, you're probably most of the time you're going to be engaging at substantially less than your maximum range, with the exception.
The British start to work out the figures which seem to matter in British tables whenever they're doing gun analysis is
Yeah,
18,000 yards and 24,000 yards.
it's kind of like with submarines. I mean, the German subs, they had torps that could go at least 5 kilometers, maybe even 10. But with the sea conditions, you would just that's why they were always like trying to attack from 1,000 meters in.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, we've been at this for a little over an hour, and you're right. We could easily sit here for a couple hours and talk about
Yeah.
this. But I think what I would rather do is wind it down here, because in 2022, I think I'd love to talk to you again, and pick your brain
Yeah.
on these topics.
I'd be happy to, because one of the things I would say is I couldn't write about the tribals and the battles and bearings and not study the American, the Japanese, the German, the Italian, and the French
Yeah.
destroyers.
Hmm.
And there are references to them made in this, and there are comparisons. And the point I always try and come across in the book is saying, look, these navies are building ships differently for a reason. They're not building, one's not right and wrong. And this is the thing I'm trying to get people most away from in the ship design analysis. There are occasionally navies do make make bad ships. They do occasionally do it. I'm not saying any navies always make bad,
Well, the
but
U.S.
usually,
a lot lately.
well, we'll try and leave the LCS out of this.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you're looking at them, there are often good navies. If there's a difference in their ship designs, there is a reason for it. And let's be honest, there is an advantage for the Americans of the LCS in that everyone has made into such a bit of a punchline, including the Chinese, that now if the Chinese are forced to visibly back down because of an LCS being there, it doesn't matter if there's a full carrier battle group over the horizon, the thing that's in camera range is the LCS, then it's kind of a loss of face for them.
Yeah.
But if they push it, they have to fight a war. And no one wants to do that. It's kind of, it goes back to the presence and deterrence mission. This was the other thing for the Royal Navies with the tribals. They had to look good. They had to look like presence. And then you look at the battles and you go, you're not really looking like the same, are you? And then the Darings come in, and as you said, they look really good and impressive.
Right.
And it's because they have to step up into the cruiser role. And there's a perception in the Royal Navy, especially in this period, and even to extent this today, that if you want to fulfill the presence mission, image is as important as the quality of the ship. If the ship can be the most well crewed, well armed vessel in the world, but if it looks like it's a mess, it's not going to work. Whereas if it looks good as well and looks visibly impressive, it has the right impact.
Yeah. This is really great stuff. Really excited that we had this chance to talk. But before I let you go, there's one last question.
Okay.
And that question is, what is your YouTube guilty pleasure?
My YouTube guilty pleasure is probably various Big Bang Theory episodes and Simpson episodes, outtakes, and bloop reels. I'm sorry, I am that sad. I like the Big Bang Theory. It reminds me of my work.
Yeah.
In that I do a lot of teaching in an engineering department, and they're not that far removed from a physics department.
Well, I'm not far from you. My guilty YouTube pleasure is definitely kittens, and kittens and just like streaming video of Japanese ramen shops, where they're in the back just like, making the broth and the noodles and everything. I can lay in bed and just watch watch that stuff for an hour. So
It's good stuff.
it is good stuff. I will say this, 54, I've been on the internet since basically, I mean, I was doing dial-up bulletin boards back in the 80s as a kid.
My claim to fame is that I've had a Google account so long that my Gmail account doesn't include any numbers.
That's funny. That's
That really does show your age when you go, yeah, my Gmail account doesn't have that on numbers.
yeah. I was very skeptical of YouTube when it kind of like first came to the forefront, but in probably 90% of the on 90% of the stuff on YouTube probably is garbage, but you do find these little pockets where
Naval
it's
history is turning into quite a good area.
I
There's
think
yourself, there's armored carriers, there's Drakenfell, of course.
yeah.
Also vintage cars.
Oh
They're a
yeah,
good channel. Yeah.
yeah. The thing with YouTube and history, it seems like it's like two tiers. You've got the really highly polished stuff that's a little bit kind of generic in its content. Um, and then you have that I don't want to say it's a second or lower tier, but you have this other tier where it's guys like you, it's guys like Drac, it's guys like me. We're looking into things, we're researching, we're getting information to people. I'm doing stuff that nobody really wants. Like who would really be interested in the production of hydrogen and chlorine gas in a U-boat when seawater comes into contact with the batteries? Like nobody really wants to watch.
That stuff you need to learn and you want to learn.
Yeah,
It's going to sound strange. I often consider these things, and I have approached my videos where I'm always trying to put in a couple of gobbets of stuff, things I call gobbets, which are a couple of gobbets which are things which are stuff which people should know but won't learn because they're just not that they're just off that out there weird stuff, technical facts, and a couple of gobbets of stories which are stories which people won't really hear about. And I'm also very keen. I always make the point in the videos when I'm talking about stuff is this, I go, well, this is stuff I wouldn't be able to put in a book because I only have like one source of it and I'm not really sure. But it's still quite a
yeah,
cool story and I want
right,
to tell you about it. Or it's like I've got a video which is coming out. This is going to sound strange. Relative to the recording of this tomorrow, which is on a picture, which has been cited by a picture I've got had sent to me, which I'm not allowed to show anyone because it's been sent to me for me to look at, but without me being allowed permission to share it. Again, this happens as a historian, and it's from a reliable source. But it seems to suggest that there was a completely different turret design available to the Royal Navy, possibly in the 1910s, in the early 1910s. And that could lead to an entire different train of thought of what you're going to build in terms of battleship design
right, right,
from the
right.
Orion class onwards. And this is the thing is, I'm going to go and find out, but I can produce a video about that, and I can go, this is the criteria, and I know people won't go and cite it and say Clarke says this, because if anyone does go and record it, they will find out clearly Clarke has said, I can't cite this, I'm not 100% sure of it, but it starts off a really interesting idea. I'm going to go research it in future and see
Yeah,
if it is.
it gets you thinking about things.
Mm,
Gets you thinking about things.
mm.
Well, so here we are at the end.
Thank you
So
for having
thank
me.
you. So thank you very much. It's really been great talking to you today.
My pleasure.
Best of luck in this coming year. And like I said, I hope we can get together and chat again in 2022.
Always love to. Take care.
All right, take care. And that's it for today, everyone. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the briefing and we'll come back again. Feel free to contact me via email. I am on Discord, Twitter, and I do have a Patreon. Thanks to USNI for doing the job they do so well. Their publishing arm is an invaluable resource to the preservation of naval history. Consider becoming a member so their work can continue long into the future. Till next time, peace out.